So Catherine, this is no, she's going through her uncle died. Oh, sure. So you get spread out.
Yeah.
Joe. Nick and Nick. No, I don't know. I wouldn't know where the city is.
No.
Wow, I haven't been out here.
PI West.
Clock somewhere. That's the one on the official clock from the International Space Station here. Greenwich Mean Time, or whatever it is, that's still alive. So we'll call the work session to order. And, you're up first, Mr. Poop.
So the first thing on the work session is to talk about an agenda item for later in the meeting. These are some revisions to our special event insurance requirements and slight tweak to the approval process for special events. The shortest version is that we require folks who get city approved special events to have $1 million of liability coverage, but we hadn't gone that much detail into what types of things could be excluded by those policies. And as we've been working through some of the fallout from 2019 Folly incident, where we were named party to a lawsuit for that basically assault that happened, and we think it's wise to go back and look at our special event insurance requirements and beef them up to make sure people can't get exclusions for things like assault and battery, car. I think there's another one. But there were some exclusions that we feel like it's make sure that folks can't exclude certain things from their required special event insurance. So that's one part of it, and the second part of it is to formalize the city's approval and sign off on these things by actually issuing a permit. Right now, they come to city council, they get approval, staff event committee reviews it, they adjust their operations, but there's no formal document that's given to them to say this is a permit for your special event. So we create that requirement, and also, and Joe might have to explain this one a little better than me, a nominal $1 lease with the city for events on public property. I think that gives us some extra protections.
Yeah, it's all about trying to close these loopholes that insurance companies use to deny coverage. And the more boxes we check, the better shape we'll be in when something like this happens. And so, number one, having a contract in place, having a lease in place could be helpful. One of the grounds for the denial for the Folly incident was that we weren't leasing them our property. So, okay, we'll start leasing property. The permitting is another thing. There's a rider that they can buy that just clarifies that governmental coverage is available as long as it's a permitted event. So I'm just literally looking through all the different riders that insurance companies can put out there and trying to make sure none of them are going to kick us out of coverage. It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. I can't tell you what it's going to be like 2 years from now. I can only do what I see that they're trying to avoid coverage now. So it gets pretty technical, but it really is just trying to find every rider that might be thrown in there by an insurance company that might be problematic for our coverage.
And there's one extra thing that we wanted to get to while we were in here tinkering with this particular section. It's something we do in practice now, is it's we require all the vendors who participate in special events to have licenses. But this would actually require the event organizer to get a list of vendors to the city ahead of time so that we could kind of eliminate that last minute scramble at 5 o'clock on Friday before the Saturday festival, making sure everyone's licensed. So that's
They got it up 48 hours prior to the event, so. Got enough time, or you need to change that?
Oh, that's good, that's good.
Okay.
Does this apply, like, if there are people like vendors like lined up on the side, sometimes there are like arts and crafts people and all that, but like, they're considered a vendor, and so you would have to make sure they have the proper licensing and all that as well. So it's everybody that's basically taking money.
And we pursue that now.
Right.
But what happens is we find out literally the day before, oh, I've got these 4 vendors who called me last night, they want to be in the festival, and we have to scramble to get the paperwork.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions on that item?
So that item C, I think this is what you're talking about.
Yeah, there are no page numbers.
I was looking for.
So,
I don't see that. Oh, here it is. So it'd be F 6C. I think it's what you're talking about, Joe. Talking about the event organizers will indemnify and hold harmless the city for all claims made against the city arising from or related to the event.
That's part of it. That's
okay.
one of the boxes I'm trying to check.
Okay.
But that's a substantive thing, and I mean, I think that's really to make something clear that I think already somewhat existed. That I mean, at the end of the day, they're obligated to indemnify us for which any landlord is going to have a tenant in a commercial situation sign off on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
My only question for the group would be the adequacy of the $1 million of liability coverage itself. $1 million in what I'll characterize as a catastrophic event doesn't go that far. I suspect 10 years ago it was $1 million requirement. Would be commonplace. Might be something we want to consider requiring of the vendors. I'm thinking one in particular being the fireworks display company, where you could have a catastrophic loss if a building catches on fire at the oceanfront. $1 million, barely brings in the assessor to determine the cause of the damage. Food for thought, whether that be 2, 3, 5.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. So you're gonna take Mr. Lutz's spot?
yeah, sir. Eric is out of the office for the next few days. And so we will move on to the conceptual pedestrian path plans for the commercial district. We're having great success with our first completed pedestrian path along West 2nd Street. 2nd Street East is currently under construction. They just wrapped up the water and the stormwater work. Once they get everything put back together, they'll build the path. And we had a pre-construction meeting for Ashley Avenue between 2nd East and West. So those are humming along. I think they've been well received. And so in preparation for phase 2, we partnered with the TVPC. The TVPC agreed to kind of take up this cause and run with it, and they funded a study to do very conceptual plans for the remainder of the commercial district. That would be every cross street from 2nd East to 2nd West. So Indian, Huron, Hudson, Erie, Cooper, to kind of round out the grid in the commercial district. So what you guys have is results of that first conceptual planning. They went out, they met with Eric, they looked at both sides of the road, they counted light poles and ditches and signs and things that need to be moved and where the storm drains, those sort of things, and laid out what they think are the bad puns, but the path of least resistance in each block. So now that we have these, our ongoing task is to determine where we would like the next set of paths to be so that we can move forward to a more in-depth look at those particular sections, start working on some engineering and then later construction. I'd like to propose that we do it in an organized manner rather than hopscotching around, and we either work backwards from the ocean, so Cooper, Erie, Hudson, Huron, or up from the river, Indian, Huron, Hudson, that sort of thing, just so we can do it in some sort of predictable, organized way, and get them all done over time, rather than, you know, a section of East Cooper here and West Huron there that don't really connect or make sense to the pattern. So we just wanted you guys to see this. Eric, I'm sure would have been prepared to answer any questions you have about these, but I can take a shot at it, or at least note them down.
Well, in just an orderly manner, if you started at Cooper and worked your way back, and you're talking about that's at least you're starting in the heaviest foot traffic area, working your way back to a lighter foot traffic area.
And then another benefit.
On both sides, east and west.
Another benefit of that is East, or Second Street East, you know, only goes back a couple blocks. It doesn't all the way to go to Indian yet. So by the time we got, you know, Cooper, by the time we worked back to Indian, we'd been able to close the loop on Second Street East. There were some conflicts identified during the planning for Second Street East, so it does not go all the way back to Indian yet. But you know, you've got a block by block breakdown each section for like, you know, for light poles, for drainage ditches, and utility boxes, that sort of thing. Just kind of give you an idea of where it's going to be more or less difficult to construct the path. One, I mean, they're not final for sure. On East Hudson, these things are arranged street by street. They go east and west. So if you look over, actually on East Huron, they've got it going on the river side of East Huron. Across the street, there's a ditch. One of the property owners on that came and said, "Hey, all the parking on this block is on the side where you have the path, so it may be more beneficial to fill in the ditch and build the path there and preserve the parking on the other side." So that's just an idea of some of the discussions that will be had as we go deeper into each one of these. But basically, wanted to get these in front of you and see how you feel about our progression, our orderly progression of completion, so we can move forward to the design phase of at least the next two sections.
Like I said,
I don't like it. I'll tell you, I mean, just looking at them on a block by block basis, you're gonna have pedestrian paths on both sides of the same road. And you're going down on both sides, you're gonna lose almost all your parking in the commercial district.
Where there are none that have on both sides.
It's not, I mean, isn't the blue, going through the blue squares they're talking about? They're saying you need to choose which side you want to be on. You're gonna wipe out half your parking in the commercial district.
On this picture, they're on one side of each street. They're not on both sides.
Which one are you looking at?
The first page.
it's only gonna be one side of the street. It's not gonna be on both sides of the street, same street. I mean, that was what we referred to when talking about the ditch. Closing in the ditch and having drop boxes and making that a path.
I mean, I just think on some streets you're gonna lose too much parking. You don't necessarily have the pedestrian need versus the parking need on some streets. I think that needs to be taken a lot more in consideration before we progress with these personally.
Well, that's why I said when you
I
start.
mean, actually, you got your whole square and your Second Street. I think that's great. That keeps them off, the busiest street, Ashley, at Second Street. But some of these, like, I don't see as much pedestrian traffic walking up and down Erie Avenue as, say, losing, 40 parking spaces.
Well, but like, that's why I said start at Cooper. So if you do Cooper Street, because that's a heavy pedestrian traffic area, when you just down here watch them all the time, up and down this street, the other side same way. Then you can go back, on Erie, right behind us, either side of the street you put it on, you're not really losing that many parking spaces unless you count those ones that are over there that they're parking at an angle instead of a parallel like it should be. So you put it on this side of the street, so you're losing one or two parking spaces. Or you say, hey, we skip Erie altogether because we don't think we need it. Go to Indian or go to wherever you think the next one is.
And in the design phase, we do what we did for Ashley Avenue. We go property by property and talk to the property owner. Where's your driveway now? Where could it be? How can we save or not save parking? And when it's built, you'll see that the Ashley Avenue path sometimes dips in to allow and preserve parallel parking, especially on the east end down by Burks. So the path being on the shoulder road doesn't necessarily eliminate all the parking, but it will cause some parking changes for sure. But they are definitely only on each street only has a path on one side.
But if we're talking about like on Huron, you said it's drawn on one side, but it may be better to do it on the ditch on the other side. If we plan to go forward with this patchwork construction, we need to nail down what side of the street it's gonna go on pretty quickly and not as we go.
Before we advance to further engineering any section, we want to nail down the proposed order of
Well, yeah,
sections.
and that's when the engineer's gonna have to come back and say, okay, you think that the, north side's better, but the south side's really better because you're not impacting in the back, you're not impacting 15 septic tank drainage fields that's been there for 40 years, and that's where septic tank drainage field is, you know. So once you get out of the commercial district, out of the sewer district, then they gotta consider all that too. So there's a lot of stuff that they still gotta talk about. But you know what, Mr. Pope and Mr. Lutz was trying to do is just say, okay, do you wanna start at the back of the island and work frontwards, or do you wanna start at the, what I call the front of the island, the ocean side, and work backwards?
Go back. Makes sense.
Or that's-
Traffic.
yeah.
And, you know, obviously, none of these things will proceed without you guys seeing it multiple times,
And then you
and the property owners. So, thank you to TVPC, if you're out there listening, this was a pretty big investment, I think, and an important piece of infrastructure. Pedestrian safety and improvements have been on the list for years and years and years, and I feel like that dam is kind of broken. And so, the ATAX revenues keep up, so we can get these things built.
So, Dr. Foley?
She needs that.
Also, you know, the drawings. You're still up.
Last up for the work session. I hope we have enough time. Thanks to everyone who came out last night, everyone up here and everyone out there. I think it was a very good meeting to help us kind of get a more clear picture of exactly what we are proposing and what we're going to put out into the world. I've got a presentation, there's copies at the desk there. If anybody needs, there's some copies at the door. But this is a summary of kind of what's changed in the proposals as of last night. We had a joint work session with the City Council and the Planning Commission, and we went through in depth all the different options that had been presented to date for boundary changes and all the different public comments and changes that have been proposed for the regulations. And although we didn't take any votes or make any decisions, we did get kind of a general consensus to support what's in this packet. And anybody who is here, please correct me if I've summarized this wrong. So tonight I just want to go over last night's results and the schedule for the future. The first page, after the title sheet, is the zoning district boundary changes. So we've had a couple alternative maps floating around, and what I hope to be the final map for consideration is here on the next page to go with this text. The colors of the map haven't changed. These are just the boundaries of the areas under discussion. And number one there shows that the backside of the current DC district, that's the lots that are currently zoned DC that are in the second half of the first block and don't touch Center Street, those would be zoned island commercial. The second, the 2 blocks down at the foot or head of Center Street, that's the lots that front Center Street between Ashley and Arctic. Those would go from currently island commercial to DC. And so the result would be a new DC district that comes down Center Street from the river to Arctic and then includes the first block of East Ashley like it does today. Does that kind of make sense to everybody?
Both sides, exactly. I mean, both sides of Ashley.
Well, just one, just between Ashley and Cooper. So that's the current.
Yeah.
Right now, what is DC in the first block would stay DC. We add the last block of Center Street and then back to the river. With the leftover formerly DC moving to IC. So that's number 1 and 2. And then number 3, we take the second block of West, call it West Arctic or West Ashley. between Ashley and Arctic in the second block west. That's currently zoned IC, and that would be zoned residential two-family.
But we'd have to put some kind of variation in there for the condos that are already built.
Right, yes, sir. So, a large part of that block is currently built out at a multifamily density rate that's no longer allowed. Multifamily use is actually not even allowed in the district, in the IC district right now. They have an exemption right now because they're in the IC district. So if we rezone them residential two-family, we'll have to carry that exemption over to protect those properties and let them be rebuilt.
Right.
So those are the three kind of boundary changes proposed for the island. Does anybody have any questions about those? Anybody want to throw out another option for further discussion, or are we good to settle on those three? All right. So there's a number 4 here that's not mapped, and that's Bowen's Island. Bowen's Island is off the beach. For anyone who doesn't know where Bowen's Island is, it's not here on the main island, and it is zoned island commercial. There's a long history there for when that area was annexed into the city. It kind of revolves around the ability to build multiple units on one lot. At the time, the only way to do that in separate buildings was to zone it commercial. When we first started this project, the proposal was to take single and two-family uses out of the IC district. So that would have left Bowen's Island zoned IC, but without the ability to build single or two-family houses. Last night, we kind of circled back to allowing single-family and two-family houses in the IC district. So if that stays in there, then there's no need to rezone Bowen's Island for that purpose, because they can build 2 units in the IC district.
So Bowen's Island would stay status quo as they were before we started talking.
For the time being. And then during all this, it's come up that in addition to the 2 units, you may want to look at the maximum square footage allowances for those 2 units. Right now, there's no zoning district in the city.
Yeah, well, that's a separate animal.
Right, so that,
Don't even throw that in here. That's a separate animal. Thank you.
so 2 needs further study. But last night we talked about residential multifamily, and if we put back 2-family uses in the IC district, there's no need to change it. So those are the boundary changes. And then within those new boundaries, we do have some text amendments or regulations for what you can and can't do in the districts. Those are on the next page. And the first section is the BC district. So we're now talking about the BC district. Center Street from the river to Arctic, first block of East Ashley. There are seven changes to the BC district. First 5 of them are proposed to only apply to lots that front on Center Street. And that would be that lots on Center Street be required to build at grade to prevent elevated buildings on Center Street to maintain the street continuity, limiting the height of new buildings on Center Street to 34 feet from grade and 2 stories. And part of that would be making rooftop decks count as a story. Encouraging semi-public spaces along the sidewalk by exempting those areas from lot coverage totals, and eliminating single and 2-family uses on Center Street. So that's kind of the first batch of proposed changes to the BC district, but they'd be written to only apply to lots that have frontage on Center Street. So in the remainder of the BC district, which would be the first block of East Ashley, we could still build a single or 2-family house. Sorry, I forgot, we're proposing to take away parking on Center Street, lots too. Because those lots are so small and lack access that parking requirements would be removed. But on East Ashley, you still have to provide parking. You could put a single family or a 2-family house. Your building height would be 34 feet from finished floor, like it is everywhere else, and buildings could be elevated. This first 5 only apply to Center Street. The next one would only apply to lots on East Ashley and not lots on Center Street. and that's an increase in the side, front, and rear setbacks from 0 feet to 10 feet. Right now, in the DC district, there are 0 foot setbacks for most uses. That would stay the same for lots on Center Street, but lots on East Ashley, which are bigger, their setbacks would change to 10 feet to 0 feet. And then in both areas, Center Street and East Ashley, would prohibit multifamily uses. And that would, that closes the loophole that allows folks to get around the square footage cap of building 3 units. Any questions for that bunch of regulations? All right, the second group is a little shorter, and these would be changes to the IC district. And the IC district would be expanded to the second half of the first block here behind Center Street, and it would be reduced by the second block west. In that new IC district, building heights would be limited to 40 feet from grade and 3 stories, and we count elevated drive under parking as a story. So you could go 40 feet from grade and you could build at the ground and 2 stories above it, but if you elevate for parking, you still only get 2 stories. You don't get 2 stories on top of parking. And rooftop decks would also count as a story. We would change the side setbacks from 0 feet to 10 feet. Right now in the IC district, for any non-residential use, the setbacks are 0. So this would make the setbacks 10 feet for all uses. We would not prohibit single and 2-family units, so those are still in, those aren't removed. And then we require any new development to construct their portion of the district pedestrian path. So we have this conceptual plan, and later we'll get on engineering, and we'll get similar to the requirement on Folly Road. You see, if you go down Folly Road, you'll see all the new multi-use paths being built. We'd say to folks, if you are developing or redeveloping a site in a commercial district, the IC district, you have to build your portion of the path. Any questions on those? So, with no changes tonight, these are the things that we're going to draft into an ordinance, put out for public hearing at the Planning Commission. Rezonings and text amendments are kind of 2 different processes that can happen concurrently. They have different requirements. And that's on the last page. How quickly or slowly can we do this? I've written up kind of an idealized schedule there on the last page. And basically, every meeting of City Council and Planning Commission between now and May would touch on this somehow. We'd have about a month to get all the notices for the rezonings mailed and posted and advertised in the paper, etc. At the Planning Commission meeting in April, they can hold public hearings on both the rezonings and the PC recommendations. To be perfectly honest, I think we probably need at least 1 or 2 special meetings of the Planning Commission in April, because when we're talking about rezoning 30 properties and changing the text, that's a marathon meeting. So we may have to work in some special meetings there to handle all that volume. But we could get it back to City Council at your April meeting for first reading, and then at your May meeting for adoption.
Okay, thank you very much. And you want to be talking about this how long?
In September, so we're making good progress.
So never assume a slam dunk when you think about ordinance is going to be. All right. So, you got a vacation until 7 o'clock?